This is Graphic Novel TK, your podcast guide to comic book publishing.
Welcome to Graphic Novel TK. I'm Gina Gagliano.
And I'm Allison Wogas.
Publishers. Who are they and what do they do? We'll go behind the scenes with one of the people who makes publishing run, Annie Koyama from Koyama Press. Hi, Annie. Can you introduce yourself and talk a little about yourself and what you do and how you got into publishing?
Sure. Hi, I'm Annie Koyama from Koyama Press in Toronto, Ontario. I run a small press that publishes mostly alternative comics, some zines. I'm branching out into art projects and that kind of thing. I have done art books, but maybe we can talk about a little bit why I'm winding down on that too. I have no publishing background whatsoever. I'm a film producer by trade. But I got sick for a long time and then was actually sent home with a terminal diagnosis about 13 years ago. Before that, I had been working in advertising and film. And while I didn't like the advertising part, it was a very lucrative job for 10 years. And so I made a good amount of money doing that in the 80s when everybody else was making a lot of money. But I decided to get out. I just wanted to get out of advertising and travel. So I saved up, and then I became ill and was not able to use those funds. So after I did not die, after a risky brain surgery, I decided I didn't want to go back to those horribly long days in film. I certainly didn't want to go back to advertising. That much I knew. I wasn't really able to travel now because of health stuff. So what else could I do? Around that time in Canada, I had read that the grants to artists were sort of drying up. They were getting cut back every year. And I had this pile of money to use. I don't have much debt. I don't have kids. And so I thought I'd reach out to some, at first, illustrators, Toronto local artists, and do projects with them whereby I would fund whatever the project was. Ideally, it would have some, tangible item that they could sell, whether it be a zine, a book, a T-shirt project, letterpress prints, that kind of thing. And then I would give them, they could keep all the proceeds from the sale of those items, and then hopefully have a little bit of money to go on and do their next project, which normally they wouldn't have. And so that was fun. Yeah, I happened upon 3 Toronto illustrators who had a collective called Trio Magnus, and we would sit and doodle together at something called Pen Club. I looked in their sketchbooks, and they did a fantastic job. And we all sort of joked that, hey, we should make a book. And though none of us actually knew how to make a book, we did figure it out. And then I think around that time, I decided to send them to Japan because one of them had been there before, maybe 2 of them. But they told me about this show that was happening there, Design Festa. So we did the book. I printed it. I sold my car in order to send them off to Japan. And that was the beginning of accidentally falling into publishing with no publishing background whatsoever.
So can you talk a little about how you went from that idea of supporting artists to making comics and graphic novels specifically?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. At first, I decided I wanted to do art books. I like a lot of fine art stuff, and I also noticed that galleries were not making catalogs anymore for the artist shows. I figured out, it was also because of money, lack of funds. And so I thought, gee, maybe I'll do art books. I love art books, I always have. And so right when I decided that the 2 stores in town that sold art books, primarily in Toronto's a pretty big city, they both closed. And so I realized, there's, where am I going to sell these? This was way before I even knew about how to get a distributor for your books. So basically I was schlepping around what books I had and selling them on consignment and at the odd show. So then around that time, I don't sleep a lot, so I was, surfing artist websites late at night when, they had websites. And this is before Twitter and Tumblr, not Twitter maybe, but Tumblr. And I found Michael DeForge's gig posters. He's a local artist who at that time was, insanely young, like 20 years old or something. And I tracked him down at TCAF, which was one of the first shows that I ever tabled at with books. He just happened to walk by my table, and because of Facebook, I knew what he looked like. And so shortly after that show, we got together, and at that time he was working on Lose, his comic series that turned into something that we published together. And we agreed to work together, and to this day we're still working together. I love him. He's become a dear friend. I knew he was insanely talented, at a young age even then. But he's just surpassed that every year. He does something more and more. So that was the beginning of me getting into comics. While I read them growing up, Pogo was read to me. I read Little Lulu and Nancy, that kind of thing, Archie, superhero stuff. I hadn't read comics for many, many years in between. Michael helped by showing me the work of, a lot of the people that you ought to know about if you decide you're going to be working in publishing and doing alternative comics. My history was this huge black hole missing. So he filled a lot of those holes by showing me stuff. He also introduced me to other local artists like Patrick Kyle and Jeanette Lapalme and Chris Kuzma, who had another collective called Wowie Zonk. I ended up publishing the Wowie Zonks a few times as a group, and I've worked several times with Patrick. I've done a book with Jeanette, and I am doing a book with Kuzma coming up in 2019. So he introduced me to people in the community who I would not have published if I didn't meet them through Michael. So I owe him quite a debt.
So it sounds like for you, publishing is a lot about these personal and individual connections.
It is very much so, and I've always said that I go for the art first, and while that is very much true, if I don't like the art, no matter how strong the story is, I don't think I would take it on. But I was recently on a panel at SPX, and Dustin Harbin was on the panel, and when I said that, he gently took issue, and he said, I think that's probably true, but really what Annie does is she picks people, and she works with people, and she publishes people, but she also supports people beyond the publishing of their book. And I've thought about that ever since, because he was totally right. I used to joke in the early days, part of my mandate was don't work with dicks. Ryan Sands, who runs the Frontier series and Youth in Decline, is a wonderful small press publisher and a friend. And he has said that I said to him early on, don't work with assholes. I say that, non-jokingly, because I do have another brain aneurysm that's not operable. So I may not have as much time as all of you, but, who knows? Nobody knows. So especially that holds meaning to me, because if I don't have as much time as, a normal person would in terms of lifespan, I really don't want to spend it working with jerks. As much as you can vet that going in. I mean, there are people, I'm working with a person right now who I've never met. I know him over emails, and I have phoned him a few times, but I won't actually meet him until his book comes out next fall. And so, that's still a bit of a chance that you're taking. This person is quite wonderful, and I'm sure he's not a dick. But sometimes my point is you can't really vet people as much as you'd like to.
When you're deciding on artists that you'd like to work with, are there particular qualities that you're looking for? Like you talked about their art, but is there a particular voice or a particular kind of personality or energy that it is that, like, how do you decide? There's obviously more amazing artists in the world than you could ever publish personally. Mm-hmm. So like, what is it that kind of makes you feel like this is the person that I want to work with?
This is a Koyama author.
Yes.
It's pretty easy to me. My mandate has been largely from day one that I want to work primarily with emerging artists. When you do that, I guess I didn't realize what I was getting into, because it's, 10 times harder to break out a new artist who no one's ever heard of, who no one has seen their work. They may have, a batch of Twitter followers or whatever, but it doesn't mean that'll translate necessarily into book sales. You can't get press nearly as easily if no one's heard of someone. If they don't have another book under their belt, it's way harder to bring them to the attention of the people who will write about them and their work. Despite all of that difficulty, I still prefer to do a lot of that, I should say, because now I get to work with Eleanor Davis, who is anything but emerging and is, a total delight. So things have evolved over the years, but breaking out a new artist and giving them a step up where most people can't afford to take that risk, it's a huge risk to, even if you don't make a lot of books. Sorry, are we stopping?
1 second. Just 1 second.
Sure.
Yes. I think we are, sorry, the doorbell just rang, so I think we're just going to pause for a second to figure out what's going on, and then we will continue on talking about how it is best to work with people who are not dicks.
Yeah, we'll remind you in a moment what you were talking about.
Yep.
I'm very sorry about that. I had a delivery that arrived at the worst possible time.
Oh, was it pizza or something good, though?
Groceries.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm sorry. My apologies.
Okay, so Annie, you were saying that the mission of Koyama is to support young emerging authors, which means that you get to work with some amazing people like Eleanor Davis, who are emerging authors as well. But you really feel like that core principle of the company is to support people who are beginning their careers.
It is to this day, and I hope, until I stop, that will always be a very important part of the company. What I didn't bank on was any success, because I just sort of went book to book. To be honest, it was several years in before I actually considered myself a real publisher. I knew that I was doing the work, but, not having that background, having these huge gaping holes of, comic history, and not having the time to catch up. Especially, I'm an A-type person, and so catching up is not just reading a few issues of Raw and, reading one Chris Ware. It's reading every single thing from day one, and so you can imagine how impossible that task is for anybody, no matter how eager, if they didn't have a job, if they had unlimited funds and time and the best library in the world, it would be daunting for anyone to do. So I have to fight against those instincts to move ahead. But I guess when I started having success in breaking out, people like Michael and Jesse Jacobs and Patrick Kyle, you want to keep working with those people and boosting them up again to the next step and keeping them on people's radar. Also, the curiosity of seeing what they will do next, and how I've learned that artists grow at very different rates. There's no right answer to, people often bemoan, oh my God, DeForge is so prolific. And he is prolific, but it doesn't mean that someone who takes, a Steve Wolfhard, who has many other things on the go, who might have one book every 4 years or 5 years, there's no less value to that work. But I feel like, unfortunately, for a lot of young cartoonists, they feel like it's a race. I get that if your friends and colleagues are being picked up and getting book deals here and there and you're not, I understand why, that's hard. But really, to watch people grow at different rates is pretty fascinating.
So something you just said was interesting to me. You said it kind of took you a while before you necessarily felt like you were a publisher. Was that just kind of a gradual process, or was there like a moment or a book where you're like, okay, now I am definitely a publisher?
I guess because I had to learn everything from day one. I never had any ambition to work in the book world. I actually did always want to work in a bookstore, and while I ended up in a retail job at some point when I was young, I never actually fulfilled that thing. But I just didn't. It was never on my radar. So, you can be an avid reader and whatever and think about books, and certainly like certain paper and pay attention and read a lot about how books are made. But I didn't have any background whatsoever. So every single thing I learned by trial and error. I'm bullheaded when I read Julia Wirtz saying in her books that, she doesn't like to be told what to do. That's funny, but it's not so funny when I'm also like that. But it's less funny when you have a lot of people relying on you, and you can't be as wild, and you can't take as many risks when you have, overhead, and you have staff that you have to take care of, and, you have bigger responsibilities. So I just bullheadedly go. I don't mind a big learning curve because I like to work. I like to work hard, and I like to work really a lot. And I like a challenge. So that stuff didn't scare me away. I guess the other thing is when you are told to go home and settle your affairs, you're going to die within 2 months, and then you don't die. You sort of have balls of steel for the first several years and think that you can do anything because it feels like you can do anything. Now, if I had not had the nest egg that I'd saved up, and I also, when I was sick, I played the stock market to grow that travel fund, yeah, I would, be perhaps a little more risk averse. But it's not in my nature not to, jump off cliffs that way. So all of those things conspired to make me go for it. People sometimes ask me, if you knew now what you know, would you go back and do it again? And the answer is yes, absolutely. I'd had, again, stupidly or whatever, into it at a time when people were beginning to say that print was dying. That would still not stop me. Of course, I would do a lot of things differently.
So you've been talking about a few different things that you seem like they're essential for you as being a publisher, like jumping off cliffs, like, investing in new people in their careers. Are there other character traits or ideals or goals that you think are necessary for publishers to have when they're looking at publishing?
I think that, yes, sensible, smart ones are, responsible, and they're good with budgets. They know how to organize people. They know how to problem solve. They know how to stay calm in the face of sometimes horrendous problems on, short deadlines and books not arriving, printers screwing up. This stuff is always going to happen to you, even to the best printer. You can do your best job you can, and shit is going to happen. You have to just keep forging ahead. You've got an artist that you can't disappoint. If you take them on, you have to be 100% about it. So the juggling of that it's stressful. Don't get me wrong. I don't walk through that stuff without sweating a lot. You're just better prepared, I think, to deal with that kind of thing. If you have had jobs where, like I did, you had to manage, hundreds of thousands of dollar budgets, you had to move around, 100 people on a day, and get all those shots in by the end of the day, and wrap your set properly with no injuries, getting everything in the can for the client, making the agency happy. All of the stuff that I did in film, I can translate into being a good publisher because I maintain that those organizing skills will do you well in any job you have.
So you're working with Consortium now as a distributor. Am I
Mm-hmm.
remembering correctly?
Correct.
Now, how did that change your business for you? Because before you were, like you said, you were doing books, basically going from store to store on consignment, and then now you have a large national distributor. Like, has that changed how you're running your business or kind of how your day looks?
Yes, it's completely changed it, so much so that while I had Ed Canerva, who is wonderful, working part-time with me prior to that, there's so much work that you have to do with the distributor, inputting all kinds of things, writing all kinds of things, that I needed extra help. So that was the beginning of bringing Ed on full-time. You have to have a certain kind of books. You have to have a certain number of titles. Your sales have to be okay enough that they're going to want to take you on. You have to be good at selling your own books to them. All of those things I was doing, but not in a formal and certainly not in a traditional way. So I had to get rid of the pamphlet comics that I love, that I grew up with, that are really my first love, and I would go back to them in a second if I didn't have to worry about distributors not taking those on, if I didn't have to worry about being disqualified for grants that I can get in Canada, but not if I do that kind of book. They have to be 48 pages, that kind of thing. So there were constraints put on me, and I'll go back and say I don't like people telling me what to do when I am, the boss of my own tiny little kingdom. That was hard for me. It was hard to be constrained that way. The other thing I guess I don't like about it that is difficult, but I mean, a lot of it is been put on to Ed because he's a better writer than I, is that you have to do the sales part, which doesn't come naturally to me. I guess I have blind faith that the stuff that I choose, I can make enough people interested in by seeing the book, but I'm also not naive. I know that in order to get it out to stores, I have to convince several people along a chain of command to get it to that store and to sell that store owner on possibly taking a chance on it. So, yes, it's changed things really a lot.
Do you feel like there are people who are reading your books now who wouldn't have had access to them before you were working with Consortium?
100%. I can't get my books by myself. I was able to get them into Indigo, which is our large chain in Canada. It's our Barnes & Noble, basically. But I don't think I'd been able to get by myself our books into Barnes & Noble, for instance, and a lot of bookstores that are not necessarily comic stores. Some of them have small graphic novel sections. So, yeah, you can't do that on your own unless you want to, have 2 copies here and there by consignment. So yeah, that's why I went with them. I didn't do very well with Diamond on my own. They wouldn't take a lot of our books, and that sort of made me irate because I saw a lot of crappy stuff that they did take, and I saw no reason why. Why would you not take Michael DeForge? I mean, this is when his star was on the rise. It wasn't just the first day I put that book out, the first of his books, and no one knew who he was. So I had issues with them, and we've done better with them through the distributor. It's still far from perfect, and I have lots of issues with them. But bringing on that heavy hitter does stuff that I can't do by myself.
I do want you to know that when you said Diamond, Gina and I made a face at each other across the table.
Was it like a poopy face?
Just like a Diamond, yeah.
I think everyone makes that face.
Yeah, no, I think it's like a reflex at this point. Anyway.
Yeah, don't even get me started on Amazon. But yes, yeah. The answer is yes. The reason I went with them is because they could get a way further reach, taking it to librarians where I couldn't. Getting it into schools where I couldn't. But I will say that if you have good retailers behind you, and I have a really great local retailer, The Beguiling, behind me, they're only one of, the good Canadian ones. There's some very supportive, wonderful ones. But they in particular, behind the scenes, they sell to libraries and that kind of thing too, to schools. And so in addition to having Consortium, which was bought by Ingram, I have, another outlet that's, knocking down those doors for me. Any help that you can get, I think you don't stop at the big distributor. I have John Porcelino getting stuff up to zine fairs, and he actually sells to retailers that may not buy from Ingram through his Spit and a Half distro. So that's very helpful. I don't sell direct, unlike most other publishers. I just don't have the labor nor the time. And to be honest, I don't have the time to be chasing people who don't pay me for months. I don't need that added on to my list, and I certainly don't miss that from the early days when I did sell directly. But again, Koyama Press is atypical in that way.
So what does your staff look like at this point? You mentioned one person who's working with you. Like, what's your office look like? How many people work with you? Do they work in the office full time? Kind of how is that set up for you?
We're in an arts hub called 401 Richmond in Toronto, which has been under attack because we're downtown amongst all the condo development. And so the city recently levied a huge tax on that building. The building is run by a woman who is a philanthropist, but a huge art supporter. And she's had that building since the 90s, early 90s, I believe. The building takes up a full city block. It's a heritage building, and it's got 4 floors of all artists, arts-related, nonprofits, some charities, some, for-profit people, and then some supplier types, galleries. It's a wonderful, wonderful, important place, and I'm very lucky to have only sat on the waiting list to get in there for a year. We have about 680 square feet. It's an open concept office with 3 huge windows. It's an old building, so they just turned the boiler on this week, and there's so much clanking in the old radiators that we have to yell to be heard. So it's a bit quaint that way. We're not allowed to put a lot of things on the walls or in the beams because they're so old. But Ed Canerva works full time. Ed lives about an hour out of town, and so I don't make him come in very often. He might work in the office 2 days a week, and then he works from home because he doesn't need to actually come in to do design work and that kind of thing. He can do marketing from anywhere. My sister Helen Koyama joined us a few years ago, and she works maybe 1 to 2 days a week. She primarily does a lot of the financial stuff, but she pitches in, and she's a great copy editor. She has tabled at shows. She does a lot for us. And then I had Daniel Niscio. I brought him in as an intern, and he was so good, and he's a great copy editor. His background is writing, but I grabbed him right out of university, and he's with us 4 days a week now. So there are days when it's Ed and I in there, all four of us in there, Daniel and I in there, Daniel, Helen, and myself. It's different every single day, sometimes just me.
And what do you do on those days when you're in the office, days when you're not in the office? Like what is the work of being a publisher?
I can't speak to anybody else because I probably do it a little bit differently. But today, for instance, I took a meeting for a couple hours with an artist from Vancouver Island, and then came in and wrote out royalty checks that Helen and Daniel have been working their butts off for a few weeks. Doing the calculations. Our bookkeeper came in, who comes in, maybe quarterly. We had a session with her. Ed worked from home. The odd person drops in. We sent out books to be considered for certain awards today. Random review copies go out. A million emails. I'm working on an interview for someone. In the few minutes I can get a minute to myself. We take turns going out for lunch. It's a pretty democratic office. There's not... we deal with stuff as it comes in. That's one day.
And the larger picture of being a publisher, it's like more than emails.
Absolutely. There's the work with the artist. Emailing is so much of it because you're either working on contracts, you're writing, you're reading, you're looking at proofs. We're waiting on hard proofs. We're trying to organize Ed to get down to the cab show in Brooklyn. And he leaves on Friday, so we're running around getting show stuff ready. We're also prepping Helen and Ed to go to Japan next Thursday for 2 shows. And so trying to get all the royalties paid out before that, sending out contracts today, reading new, I'm not taking submissions because I'm overbooked for 2019 and I can't handle any more. Even with what I have, and I'm not even sure how I'm going to do 2019 at this point, but I'm always reading stuff when I can. I'm often out taking meetings when the other 2 or 3 are in the office. There's attendance meeting. Every day is different. You name it. I'm sure I'm missing all kinds. Oh, foreign rights. Who owes us money, chasing retailers, sending off foreign rights contracts, sending books to the people in Europe or Asia or whatever who are considering publishing our books in different languages, getting stuff to the artists, making sure people have places to stay at a show next week, checking in on grant writing. It's endless, and every day is different.
So you said that you are booked up for 2019 right now. Can you tell us about how many books you're publishing a year? And are there any, categories your books break down into, like kids or art comics or genre categories or anything like that?
Sure. I'm probably doing about 13 books a year now. For a long time, it was 8 to 10 books. But a few years ago, I took on the odd kids book, and so we can have 1 kids book a year, or we might have 4 out of those 13 slots. I have certain people whose autobio work I love, and so I continue working with Kyla Roberts, Julia Wirtz when she's ready. I basically have to have stopped doing the art books because it's held me back, to be honest. There's not a big market for it, and doing them in smaller runs just does not pay off because they're virtually all colored books. They're very expensive to produce, and if you can't sell a lot of them, and there aren't places to sell a lot of them, and honestly, a lot of people will pick up the art books at a show and say, "Oh, was this on Tumblr? Oh yeah, I've seen it all," and then not buy the book. So it's wonderful. They know that author, they've seen the work before, but I'm there, at the end of the day to sell that book. And if I can't sell that book, eventually I've got to, put my love of certain things aside for commerce. or we're not going to be around in a few years. So that part is a no-brainer. But, certainly art comic stuff. I mean, this year I did Antigone by Connor Williamson, and it's certainly an art comic. It's, it's a head scratcher for some people based on some of the reviews I've seen, and yet, some people are already saying book of the year. I think he's brilliant. I think you should watch him because he's going to be huge. I honestly find it hard to describe some of the stuff I'm doing for the next couple of years, but you'll see. I mean, I'm not averse to weird stuff, and there's some weird stuff coming.
Oh, so exciting.
You mentioned that you're doing 12 or 13 books a year. What determines that? Is it money? Is it how many hours you have in the day? Like, what's the limit that you're running up against when you're deciding how many books you can do?
It's very, very much how much time I'm able to spend on each book without feeling that I'm cheating each artist. I want to have a lot of input, and I want to be able to sell them as equally as I can. Obviously, when you go to a show or whatever, when you stop working with all emerging artists and you bring in an Eleanor Davis or, have a Julia Wertz or a Renee French, the balance changes. I can't help that. They already have a huge readership. You're going to sell more of those books. They have way more fans already just by virtue of them coming to you with that background. So I can't make it as fair as it used to be, but I don't ever want to look back and say, oof, I did 15 books that year and I love every book to death, but I feel like, gee, maybe we could have done more for Patrick's book or, Sue Kim's book. I don't ever want to have that regret. And so I think I sort of top out around 13, 14. I probably could do 2 more and devote enough time where I feel okay about it. But on the other hand, I'm trying to combat my natural workaholic tendencies. I'm not 20 and I'm getting tired. I can't work 7 days a week anymore. I don't want to work 7 days a week anymore. I have a partner. I'm still, trying to get back into being a good girlfriend because I've been a shitty girlfriend for many, many years. Never being able to go on vacation with them and working all weekend, sending them off, by themselves, way too many times. So fortunately, my partner has a huge job too and is often out a lot and understands personally that I need a certain amount of space, just as a person, because I'm like that if you're going to live with me. So I have that stuff going for myself, but I have been pushing that a little bit too far over the last few years. So if I want to keep working 24/7 for 7 days a week, yeah, I can take 15 books on or more and, sleep at night a little bit, but I don't want to anymore. So I'm not going to cut back the books that I'm doing. If I were smart, I'd cut back to 10 books. But, clearly my passion outweighs my intelligence sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that should be something that hopefully is like thought-provoking and inspiring for anyone who's looking to get into publishing in any way, whether they're a creator or a publisher, or if they want to be a designer or a copy editor. You have to have some time to live your life. Mm-hmm. And you have to build your job so that you have some time to have your life and to be a good girlfriend and to go on vacation sometime.
There's one other thing that I don't believe in not paying people for their work, and so I won't use unpaid interns. I know that I could get more done and schlep a lot of the lower level mundane stuff off to unpaid interns, and I choose not to do it. So that's a personal choice. I'm certainly not dissing anyone who does that. It's hard what we do. There's not much money in what we do. I certainly don't, look down on people who do that, but I don't think I'd be able to sleep. It's just not in my nature that if I couldn't pay people properly. So
you have been mentioning a little the idea of art and the idea of commerce. Can you talk a little about how you manage the balance of publishing these great books, some of them very art comics, some of them a little weird and wild and awesome, and some of them by people with larger audiences? Like, how do you make that art and commerce kind of come together?
To be honest, you juggle really a lot because I want to still break out books that I know may not sell very much, but they're not costing any less than, a fancy book that I know will sell well, or a book by an Eleanor Davis which I don't have to worry about as much for sales, although I do have to promote it totally, incredibly, as completely as I would anything else. It's always juggling. I just can't juggle quite as much as I used to in the early days. For at least the first half of the 10 years of Koyama Press, I was just running on all my own funds, so I could do whatever the hell I wanted to, and I did. I don't care if, in those days I'd sell 200 copies of something. It was more important for me to get that artist's name out there, and so you'd know them and hopefully maybe someone else would take a chance on them, maybe a gallery would pick them up. It might not be a next book. It might be a next step, and they could get an animation job. I mean, I look at the bigger community as my goal for fitting in. I'm not just there to publish books, and I know it's a huge thing to strive to do on top of your publishing job, but I don't think that more and more, the longer I do that, the more need I see to support artists more than just, basically printing their book, getting it out there, getting them to shows. It's hard to be an artist. It's really, if you're in a city like I live in and where you guys are located, it's horrendous, the rents. So many people can't afford a studio space now. It's just out of their reach. And I don't want to see any of them quit because they're being priced out of a market. And so I can't just stop at a book for them. So if, as much as I can, and sometimes it comes out of my own personal pocket, I will send them to residencies. I'll give them help to get to a show that I'm not tabling at overseas, that kind of thing. They wouldn't be able to do it on their own without, really being poor when they got back. But why should they not have those opportunities? I feel you have to, like Dustin Harbin said, what I referred to early on, if you don't support the person, it's nice to, support one facet of their practice, but some of them are not going to be around and they're going to give up. And I would certainly blame no one for giving up, especially if you only did comics for very little money. The math makes no sense whatsoever on paper. It's a shitty deal. The market is not growing as much as I'd like it to grow, and I don't really know the solution to that. Clearly, other people who are better at their jobs and have done this way longer than I also don't know the answer. So, I don't feel badly, but what it does make me do is if I can't do much about that or can't figure out how to fix that, what can I do beyond making a book for someone and getting it out there properly for them? I can support their whole practice. Here's another thing that I've been doing quietly for a long, long time, but I'm going to be more vocal about it because it's just the economy, and I think it really started with Trump getting in. I don't want to turn this into a political rant here, but it made me think very deeply about how artists are going to survive in this new world that we're all dealing with. And I think that if more people than myself choose to embrace ways to support artists beyond the books that we make for them, maybe I'm being naive, but it's my hope that it'll be more sustainable to be an artist. I won't have a look on my face when somebody who's in second year at an arts college asks me very seriously, like, oh, what is it going to be like when I get out? I do go and talk at schools and tell them the hard facts. I don't want anyone to quit, but I also don't want them getting out and thinking that the minute they get out that, you guys are going to give them a book deal. It doesn't happen for everyone, as you know.
Yeah, and most book deals are not most people aren't getting like $100,000 book deal.
Pay back your art school debt.
Yeah. So I don't know. I have lots of questions myself. But the whole point of that is I try more and more to support the whole community. I can't publish all the people I want to. I just don't have the room. I may not have the resources to do all the books. I like the size that my company is. I love the crew that I have. I have said publicly that I can't do it without them anymore, which is true. But just as important, I don't want to do it without them anymore. I like who we have. We all fit in well. We all have a good shorthand. We have lots of laughs. We don't take life too seriously, but we take our jobs very, very seriously. In order to do more, I'd have to hire more people. Well, I could probably figure that out. I think I'm choosing not to.
Do you feel like because you're a smaller publisher with a smaller staff that you're able to think more holistically than... Because you don't have like a larger company you're operating within, you can just be making these decisions about how you want to deal with your authors or deal with your books. Like, do you feel like that's one of the advantages, of being a smaller company?
It's only an advantage in that I choose personally to do more than just publish the books. I understand that if you have the resources, you may not choose to do that, and that's totally fine. There's no judgment, but I have the luxury of having been able to do that from day one and do all kinds of projects that were not books, that didn't make a return for myself, that only may have benefited the artist, and in those years didn't benefit KP. I think that no, I have the same overhead, proportionally. Then, I have to take care of the same costs that you would have to, but only on a smaller scale. So, I can't be screwing around the way I could 5 years ago and be taking certain kinds of risks anymore. So, no, do I like that? No, I don't love that, but I'm not going to ever do anything that would cause any of the books to have less sales, and therefore the payment out to the artists. I don't want them to suffer because I'm being a cowboy or a cowgirl.
But I do think that desire to change things and do things and having like the indecisiveness and unreasonableness, like it's part of all of our natures. Like no one is going into being a publisher and saying, 24 hours of the day, I am going to be like a logical, reasonable Vulcan all of the time in all of my thoughts even, right? I think that the thing that matters is doing your best for your company and your books, and everyone at some time is like, this author is accidentally a dick, or I wish I could do the following crazy projects that in no way I can do, or any of these things. I think what matters is that struggle and challenging yourself to think through those moments that you have of questioning what you're doing.
Sure. And I mean, we should all have fun at our jobs. We all work hard at them, and there's not tons of return. All the more reason to, we have to take it as dead seriously as we have to be professional. There's room for fun. And, if you open yourself up to that kind of thing, I think you are going to be more naturally amenable to taking a risk on somebody, which that's just the beginning of opening up, a certain world to another artist who may not get that break. So I'm fully supportive of that.
Can you talk a little about the landscape of comics publishing and what you think about it? There's lots of people publishing comics right now, everyone from Marvel, DC, Boom, Image, Oni, Drawn and Quarterly, Fantagraphics, Lion Forge, book publisher imprints like Scholastic Graphics or First Second or Pantheon. What do you see when you look at all of that?
You mean, where do I fit in, or what about the world? How is it going?
I think both. Yeah.
I think that our place in the world is, I really truly believe that even with our small staff, that we really do punch above our weight. We can't afford to hire a fancy publicist, much as I'd love to have somebody, properly promote any of our books. And so when you're doing everything yourself, you're primarily, you are buying ads and that kind of thing. You are going to shows, you're paying the distributor to take your books to shows that you're not at, getting them to library shows, that kind of thing. But you're using social media really, really a lot. So basically, it's your time that you're using. I think that for the smaller pressers like myself, we do the same amount of books as some companies that are larger, who have way larger staff. So, when I think about that, and it's been brought to my attention because I didn't figure that out on my own, we work hard. Aside from, going up the next rung and having the money to, bring in a dedicated publicist, I hire an outside copy editor, but we still all copy edit. We go through many runs in-house. That definitely still keeps you in the, probably the lowest third in terms of size. But I think that my point is, you can be small like we are. You can do only 12 or 13 books, but you can have a way higher profile than a lot of other companies who are the same size, who are also working hard and may have the same resources. So I think that it's not fair across the board. It's not. I don't think you can compare every company that has the same amount of staff. If you pulled up every company that did 13 books a year, and we'd all be very different. We'd all be doing different things. We'd probably be doing things different ways. I love that there is so much work out there. I think that's fantastic. There's so much work out there. A lot of it is very, very good. Not everyone can be published, but there are so many different models to publishing now. I guess even though I've only been in the game 10 years, I myself would never choose to do a Kickstarter. However, as you know, some people are incredibly successful at doing it, from the big companies to a small company. So that's a model that didn't exist when I started. I think that companies like 2D Cloud, who are small, comparable in size in terms of what they put out, but they fund their books by pre-order via a crowdfunding campaign every season. The stress of thinking about them doing that and, possibly not making their goal one time, and also the kinds of books that they do, for instance, wonderful art comics that are probably never going to have a huge audience, but, you know that going in, but absolutely deserve to be published and be out there. I have huge admiration for companies like that are honestly hanging on by their fingernails. I like the range that you can have, the huge companies putting out fancy things like Chrysler Monograph, and then you can have people doing scenes, self-publishing scenes, and doing little crowdfunders at the bottom or at the other end, not the bottom, but the other end of the scale, the bottom in terms of size. So that makes me excited. What makes me frustrated is I feel like we're not growing the market. And if we can't grow the market, how big... you can add more and more companies in, but we need people to buy these books in order for all of us to be sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, in any conversation about comics these days, eventually the conversation goes to audience and distribution and like the market, like how to connect this really great book with a person who will love it but has never heard of it before.
Correct. And also introducing, for myself, I've fought really hard to show people a different kind of book. I've often had people come to a table and say, "This is a comic?" And, yeah, it is a comic. It's just a different kind of comic. You have to train people how to see differently. There are many ways of seeing, but most people are only taught a certain way. And, anybody can learn to see differently. But I feel like on top of our day job, the onus is on us to be teachers, to be educators, to those people that, you can look at all these different things and, they all still fall within this realm of kinds of books that you should know about. You ought to know about that they exist. You don't have to like them. Maybe you will not like it, but you will take it home and think about it. Maybe your kid will like it. Maybe your partner will like it. And then, then we've gained a follower there.
Well, I think that is a great note to wrap up on. Annie, do you have any kind of last sentiments or thoughts or other things that you want to talk about publishing that you want to tell us?
There's one thing that I would like to see in alternative comics, and I hope I do see it during my time, and that is to see more women become publishers. I know there are people out there who could do it, who would do a good job. Some of them need financial backing to do it. Some of them are out there breaking out, doing it, project to project. But I think that you'll see after a few of those projects a cohesive line that would, culminate in a really nice little publishing company. So I'm going to try hard to push people to make that happen. Obviously, the work has to be good. And, I'm not just saying anybody who is a woman do this, but I know there are people who are interested in doing this. And I would just like to see more of them actually having that job. I want people who want my job. I don't meet very many people who want my job. I'd like to see more people, especially young women, who want this job.
Well, thank you so much. That was fantastic. We so appreciate you taking the time to come talk to us this evening.
If people want to learn more about you and Koyama Press and your books, where should they find that on the internet?
KoyamaPress.com. I'm on Twitter. There's a Koyama Press Facebook page. You can find me on Facebook as a person also. We still have a good Tumblr as Koyama Press. Instagram, I do put some stuff up, but, generally, maybe not Instagram. I put injury pictures there, so maybe not. The website, I think. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Graphic Novel TK. Next time, we'll be talking to literary agent Jin Lanan about the process of pitching a book to a publisher from the perspective of creators and their agents. Looking forward to it, and see you then. Graphic Novel TK is co-produced by Gina Gagliano and Allison Wilgus and is brought to you by The Beat. You can find our show notes along with other comics news and podcasts at comicsbeat.com. Our podcast graphics were created by Shivana Sokdeo. Our theme music is by Poddington Bear. You can follow us on Twitter at Graphic Novel TK or email us at graphicnoveltk@gmail.com.
We'll go behind the scenes with one of the people who makes publishing. Wait a sec. Sorry. I'm like, what is this word that I have written here?
We're having a handwriting
here
problem.
We go. Okay. Starting this over again.
Gina likes to write these notes to herself when she gets to my house and then can't read her own handwriting.
Yes. This is what I get for stealing poor quality pens from the Children's Book Council.